welcome. My name is Laura Millen. I'm interim director of the museum. And I would like to say just a few things and then introduce our guest speakers who will each give you some brief comments on the subject here tonight, which is so depressing. I felt like I was preparing for a wake or something today. What I'd like to just read to you is the position on this issue that has been issued by the American Association of Museums, of which this is an accredited member, this museum. Our position is that agencies should be reauthorized without restrictive language limiting the kinds of grants that may be given or the type of material that may be funded. This is exactly the same position that President Bush has taken when he recommended reauthorization of the NEA with no restrictive language. It is the same position taken by every other arts and humanities group that is affected. Why no restrictive language? 1. The NEA and NEH have operated for 25 years without any kind of restrictive language regarding content. Their record is exemplary. In the NEA's case, less than 20 grants out of 85,000 made have ever been controversial in nature. What other funding agencies can make a similar assertion? 2, there is evidence that the restrictive language in the 1990 appropriations bill is having negative effects, mainly in nervousness on the part of institutions about presenting anything that may offend anyone for any reason. The Cincinnati case adds to the chill. 3, there are legitimate freedom of expression and First Amendment rights issues involved, including such restrictive language. It represents a form of preemptive censorship. President Bush said it well in a news conference on the 23rd of March when asked about the NEA controversy, quote, "I don't know of anybody in the government or government agency that should be set up to censor what you write or what you paint or how you express yourself," end quote. I'd like to read you another quote that's a little bit more lengthy. In recognizing those who create and those who make creation possible, we celebrate freedom. No one realizes the importance of freedom more than the artist, for only in the atmosphere of freedom can the artist flourish. Artists have to be brave. They live in the realm of idea and expression, and their ideas will often be provocative. Artists stretch the limits of understanding. They express ideas that are sometimes unpopular. In an atmosphere of liberty, artists and patrons are free to think the unthinkable and create the audacious. They are free to make both horrendous mistakes and glorious celebrations. Where there is liberty, art succeeds. This goes on in equally exaggerated language, and it was spoken by Ronald Reagan, presenting the National Medal of the Arts on April 29, 1985. I think that some of the congressmen today are not quite as wise as Reagan and Bush are about this issue, realizing that jumping on the bandwagon and coming out with with a pro-censorship position, an anti-federal funding position, is as if they're saying no to censorship, one and the same. And I think that we know that that's not true, and we need to communicate to congressmen, not just those involved in reauthorization, but all of them up for re-election or in all of those campaigning, that we don't see the issue that way. We don't see that simplistic equation. What can be done? In addition to writing a letter, today we're advocating that everyone in Montana write a letter to Pat Williams, because he is the chairman of the House committee that has jurisdiction over reauthorization, because he's our representative, and because he's fighting hard for NEA reauthorization without restrictions. But in addition, all the congressmen on the committees need to be contacted either with a letter, a telephone call, a telegram, a postcard, something. And as I said, other congressmen in our state also need to be contacted, and I have 800 numbers for each of them that I'd be happy to pass out or could read right now if anyone wants to take them down. Ron Marlinay, 1-800-332-5965. Conrad Burns, 1-800-334-1513. And Max Bacchus, 1-800-332-6106. The purpose of this meeting, really, in addition to gathering, our hope was to gather letters, is also to inform and involve you in joining us as leaders in the community, to take action, to get your friends involved, to get your friends to write, telegram, telephone. Finally, I'd like to just tell you, I spoke with Ann Hausman, who is staff member for the Committee for Reauthorization, the House Committee, and I just wanted to give you a brief description that she gave me on where the process is at. Public hearings have ended, but the committees are working towards marking up a bill, is what they call it. And it will then be voted on by the subcommittees, the House and the Senate subcommittees, and amendments will be added to the bill at that point by committee members. Then it goes to a full committee for a vote, and again amendments can be added there. Well, and also she explained that before a bill can even be reported out to Congress, it has to go through the Rules Committee, and the rules are debated and then voted on. So this is a process that goes through many stages. Public input is important right up to the last minute. She swore to me. I asked her every which way, does this really matter, this kind of work we're doing, this advocacy work? Is it going to continue to matter? She said, yes, absolutely, it matters, because this is truly a case where it's not over till it's over. It's a situation that's changing every day, and as you all probably already know, the pro-censorship voice is much louder than the voice defending freedom of expression. So that's what we're here for today, is to try to organize a louder voice. I will not introduce each of the speakers. I'll just let them come on up to the podium in this order. First, we'll hear from Sue Talbot, who is an art activist here in Missoula of many years, and a member of the Montana Arts Council, excuse me. David Nelson is here with us tonight, too, who is the executive director of the Montana Arts Council. Deborah Franson is here tonight, too, as president of the Planned Parenthood Board, a group who has fought a similar fight from a different position. And Dana Broussard will speak briefly, too, from the standpoint of an artist. So, Sue.
Thank you, Laura. That term, arts activist, kind of scares me. It makes me, no, that's all right. It's a compliment. I'm just somebody who likes the arts and likes to work for them. I don't see myself giving a speech tonight, but merely hopefully giving you some information which maybe help you understand what the arts in Missoula have received from the National Endowment. First of all, let's start with exactly what the National Endowment has done directly for Missoula artists and arts organizations. I have, David Nelson gave me a wonderful long printout of the funding directly from the National Endowment to Missoula artists and arts organizations in the past 20 years. $296,450 right here to our community. We need also to understand that the endowment works in several ways. Some of the funding is direct, some is indirectly. And a part of the funding, which the Montana Arts Council gets, a large part of the funding, comes from the National Endowment for the Arts. And David Nelson will be talking to you more about that. But I'd like to share with you what the Montana Arts Council, through the help of the National Endowment, has done for Missoula artists and organizations. In the past 10 years, $307,636 has gone to Missoula artists and Missoula arts organizations. Let me just give you a few names so that you'll have a better picture about the broad spectrum, and this is not by any means all of them. The Missoula Museum, right where we are right now. The Missoula Symphony, the Missoula Children's Theater, Young Audiences of Western Montana, Very Special Arts, KFUM Radio, the City of Missoula for their Blues and Jazz Festival, the String Orchestra of the Rockies, the Mendelssohn Club of Missoula, Garden City Ballet. You see that it covers a lot that we enjoy here in our community. The third part of governmental support for the arts may be an organization about which you don't know as much as you know about the National Endowment and the Montana Arts Council. Maybe it's an organization you've never heard of. It's a regional arts organization which serves the 13 western states, and it's called Western States Arts Federation. Like the Montana Arts Council, it is supported in large part by the National Endowment. It has brought to our state a large number of arts events and arts support which would not otherwise be available to our rural state. A very good example is the performing arts fee support that the ASUM programs get every year. This year, for example, there was a wonderful performance of Carmen given by the Western Opera Theater to a packed theater, the University Theater. Now, maybe some of you know enough about opera history to know that when Carmen was first put on, it was considered very immoral. And it is now one of the great opera favorites of all time. I wonder if Bizet would have been able to get National Endowment for the Arts support under the contemporary rules of obscenity. A more poignant example is an ASUM program I saw exactly 2 weeks ago tonight, called Ballet Hispanico, a beautiful evening of dance at the University Theater, also a packed house. And yet, the piece was set in a bordello. The material was frankly erotic, not obscene, but erotic. And in many ways, it was very violent and disturbing. It was beautiful dance. It was very exciting. It was very well done. Ballet Hispanico has been funded by the National Endowment for the Arts. And I personally, after an evening like that, hope that art of that caliber is not going to be defunded or threatened or closed down or merely just chilled, because some people are afraid to fund the innovative or the daring. In summary, I would stress that the National Endowment for the Arts has directly and indirectly contributed to the artistic vitality of our community, and I hope that those contributions will continue. David.
And I have to tell you how proud I am on behalf of that agency and how it has handled its business over those years. I can go back so far as to remember the debate about whether there should be a National Endowment for the Arts at all. And I remember one artist commenting, and it's certainly been borne out. He said, Congress trying to decide what art is like watching an ape try to thread a needle. And that's exactly the situation we find ourselves in today. The fact is that there was a lot of concern about the establishment of the National Endowment for the Arts and what role government would play in the arts, because the arts, by their very nature, are fiercely independent and always must be so. And so the rules that were set down from the very beginning, starting with the legislation, buffered the National Endowment for the Arts from political interference. And that's probably why it's gotten itself so visible these days, is because when this, first of all, you have to understand, every time Senator Helms runs for the Senate, which is every 6 years, he attacks the National Endowment for the Arts. It's like clockwork. And so it should be no surprise that the opening shot across the bow of the endowment started with Jesse Helms. Interesting enough, when the first concerns came up, it was over outrageous things like a poem that had received a grant. There was an anthology published, and it was award-winning poems, and one of the poems happened to be 1 word long. And there was great debate on the floor of Congress, led by Senator Helms, saying, how outrageous can we be that the National Endowment for the Arts would fund a 1 word poem? And the poem was Lighght, and got great mileage over that. By the way, if you want a little insight into why that was a poem and why people thought it was quite interesting, is that it was describing a candle. And if you watch a candle and it flickers, L-I-G-H-G-H-T. And it was just a verbal recounting of what a flickering candlelight is. So this has gone on, but the endowment had always been buffered. The legislation says that Congress will not interfere with the content of any art. And so when the first concerns started to mount, and it started with the Serrano piece, Serrano is an artist who is a photographer of some reputation, who uses a variety of elements to diffuse light. And in this case, in many cases in the past, he's used his own blood. In the case of the image of the crucifix submerged, he used his urine, and he is not without his religious beliefs, and he was making a statement about what has happened with religion, and ironically, of course, that was all that was needed to start off a very interesting set of events. Then came the Mapplethorpe issue. So let me try to put a little perspective on why things have gotten out of hand. I've told you that every time Jesse Helms would run for Congress, we would have some issues relative to the funding of art, because it's an easy way to get into the headlines. It's a very inexpensive way to get your name and visible, and it will always draw reporters and articles. But going back to the time when a one-word poem seemed to be outrageous, now we're in a whole different era. And so as I watched these stars lined up, I could, in my gut, understand why we were in for tough times. The first issue has to do with how effective fundamental religions have been in being activists. And to understand, in the very competitive world of business, anybody that's advertising and thinks they might be losing a percent of the market share gets very nervous. In the case of Reverend Wildman and his group, he has 340,000 people who write letters at the drop of a hat. So this group has been very effective. And so you take the Serrano piece and the crucifix, and now one star lines up. Now the other thing you're probably aware of is that with AIDS, I think, can be defined like any other plague. I mean, if you want to understand what AIDS does, look back to the history of plagues. And in the history of plagues, you will find that sooner or later, some group gets identified and gets set aside and persecuted because they caused the plague. And so we live in a society that's very worried about AIDS, but the whole issue of homosexuals as a group, well protected by law, is not a real visible issue, but one layer beneath is a horrible amount of anxiety about the issue. And so now we have number two. If you'll notice, almost all the discussions about the art anymore have to do with homoerotic, which is a new word for me. I think it was invented maybe by Senator Helms. But there's a purpose for that. The homosexual theme comes back and back, because that's the second hot button. That's the second. Now we got religion and the second hot button. And the third issue really has to do with the fact that the idea of government supporting anything has been dwindled away. The fact of it is that we came out of an era where there were a lot of federal programs, and the endowment was part of that era, to an era now where there's a concern that's become popular that government should be out of absolutely everything. And it's the commoditization of everything. It's everything has its price, and if you're willing to pay that price, then you can enjoy the art or anything else. And of course, from a historical perspective, that's a very dangerous mentality, because we know in the history of art that if there isn't a substantial base of funding for those things which are either not yet popular or those things that do not by their nature have a broad audience, over a period of time, the art world suffers. And you'll end up with a lot of plays that are reborn and a lot of historic art. And if you really want to look at the full spectrum of an ultra-conservative assessment, it would say something along the lines that if government has any role at all in funding the arts, they should be funding dead art. And by that I mean art that is 50 years old or is already gone through the test of whether or not it's acceptable or whatnot. And that's basically a European model. So as you see these stars line up, and then you have an election year, and you have the past election year, we saw how effective negative campaigning was. And now you can see how easy it is to say, I do not think the government should fund dirty pictures as a soundbite. And now what's the respond to that? It's not a soundbite. It's let's talk about it, let's reason, let's understand what happens and how censorship starts with one small decision and then grows. So line all those things up, and there's no wonder that we have our work cut out for us. Back to a little good news. It's been my observation that whenever the arts have been put under a test or under trial at the state level, they've come out stronger. And I suspect, though I'm not a Pollyanna, that when this is all over, we will come out stronger. But the dismaying thing is that I think we've become complacent. And I don't think that we're responding quickly enough to the issues. And in fact, if you don't maintain the high ground in the art, you spend a lot of time trying to crawl up that hill, and that's basically what we're doing right now. I have to tell you, we've lost the high ground. The only thing that has borne out our concern that separates the issues from those people which say, I am against censorship. I just don't think my tax money ought to go for this crap. Now, that's, that's now those two hot buttons. This country is not pro-censorship by its very nature. And so I am not for censorship, but I am against dirty pictures. Now, I find that a hard road to take myself. I think that because something is government funded doesn't mean you have to apply a censorship role to it. I think the high road for any government official is to say, yes, government can both fund it and keep its hands out of it. In other words, we can see the higher purpose, and we can, as reasoning adults, understand that if you have a system of support for the arts that's working, something is going to come out the other end that some people are offended by. It's just a fact of life. And it should be that way. And as Garrison Keillor said, Garrison Keillor, who got his start in the arts world because of Prairie Home Companion, because of endowment support for the Arts in Schools program, which he was part of, he said he's a little embarrassed that the number of problems with funded art is so low. Maybe we're not doing our job, because we should be encouraging people to stretch a little bit. Anyway, therein lies the milieu that we're operating in. But the fact is that in the society we have today, we simply have to be more organized and more willing to respond, because the issues of censorship start very slowly and then gain steam. And if you want to know, again, the far right's assessment of where the Constitution should be, go back and see Bork's testimony where he said, I don't believe the Constitution protects art. The Constitution only protects art that deals with politics. So, you start lining up all those issues here, and on what are the balancing issues? The balancing issues simply are, we know that it has worked. We know that it has had flaws, but the system is the best system anybody's ever come up with. And if you talk about eliminating the National Endowment for the Arts at this time in history, you're sure to set this country back in dimensions we can't understand, because I can tell you Europe is not doing that. The budget for the city of Paris, the art budget for the city of Paris, is 170 million American dollars. That's for Paris. The budget for the National Endowment for the Arts for the whole country is $170 million. So Europe is going to take off like a shooting star with what's happening there, celebrating in the Eastern Bloc the people who have kept the idea of freedom alive, who are the artists. You see it every time you turn on your TV. It's the artists that are the political activists. It was the art centers that were the fermenting ground for freedom. The artists do keep the idea of freedom alive, even in an oppressive situation. So this country cannot in any way afford turning the clock back. And that's why it is a noble issue for which we are undertaking. And I just encourage you to realize that we're at a time now where people simply have to act. They have to write the letters, they have to become vocal. Now, I would love to discuss with you one-on-one, or I'd love to take any questions, the tougher the better, on this issue. But I can just say in closing that the National Endowment for the Arts has worked remarkably well. I can talk to you about its flaws, but on the whole, it's been a very remarkable system. And if we're simply talked out of that system because there have been certain images which, taken out of context, have caused an emotional reaction, then this country is going to be completely governed by just purely emotional issues, and that's a very dangerous state of affairs. I won't go any more, but thank you very much.
I'm just going to speak for a few minutes, but I'd like to speak from my heart as an artist. A while ago, 1980, and before that, 1975, during very formative years in my career, I was fortunate enough to be able to receive some fellowships. First, a Western States Arts Federation Fellowship in 1975, and a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in 1980. And I really believe that the time that money allowed me was really sacred time, was time that I had to give to myself for spiritual growth, give to myself to be able to look into the unknown and to find new avenues of thought. And because of that, I feel like it made me a more mature artist. It made me be able to grow and develop in such a way that hopefully I have been able to give back something to my community and my state and my country in art. And I have tried to do that. I've tried to do my part and serve the community as an artist, to bring Artists in the Schools programs to our small town of Arlene, to help in the museums and so on. But I think it's because I've been able to have more confidence in myself and in the arts because of time for growth. And an awful lot of artists are not fortunate enough to have that. They're struggling and they're desperate, and most of them don't have very much money and are working as waitresses and barmaids and doing other kinds of things to make the ends meet. Because I've had time to make strong inquiries as art, I've realized that it is our place as artists to make inquiries. That is why we're here. We are to question, to ask, to be adventurous, to go out into the unknown. That is what we are here for as artists. It doesn't make any difference if other people agree with us or disagree. That is their right to agree and disagree. We want what we say to be provocative. We want it to have meaning. We want it to elicit thought in other people. That is why we are here as artists. But what is desperately important is that whatever reaction they have, those people are able to come to it on their own terms. They are able to find their own conclusions and not the conclusions that are mandated by the government. We must be free to make our own conclusions about all kinds of things in life. This cause of being able to make inquiries is really, in my opinion, the very cause for our existence as artists. And those of you artists and art lovers out there must realize that we have got to come forward to this cause. We must be outrageous about it. We must stand up and demand that we be allowed to inquire, and be allowed to inquire freely. We cannot go back in our studios and say this is not our problem. We can't go shut the door and think that if we go back and make art, it doesn't make any difference. We're still making art. Because this is something much greater than that. This really threatens the existence of us and who we are. And I think that we need to embrace this cause now. If we do not embrace it, we will be very sorry for it later. And if we do embrace it, our children in the future will be very happy. Thank you.
We were talking earlier what constitutes paranoia and what constitutes a legitimate fear. And in the case of what I'm going to be speaking about today, which is the connection between the fundamentalist rights attacks on art and their attacks on other freedoms, I think we've gone beyond paranoia and conspiracy theories to a legitimate fear. I was talking to my husband the other night about this, and he sort of succinctly said before he rolled over and went to sleep, art is the expression of truth, and they want to repress truth. That was it. All right, I said, fair enough. It's no coincidence that when the Senate was holding hearings on the reauthorization that Phyllis Schlafly spoke against it. You may know Phyllis from being president of the Eagle Forum, which is an organization which was started many years ago primarily to defeat the Equal Rights Amendment. Phyllis also has said a number of real pearls, but she said, "We are starting a movement in the state legislatures to ask for laws to mandate the teaching of abstinence and to forbid the teaching or discussion of sexual activity in the public school classroom." So we're starting to see a through line here. This group started out many years ago, and I heard a speech about this, starting out primarily to deregulate big business. And when to some extent they had accomplished that, they moved on to a broader agenda. This reactionary, very vocal, perhaps shrill minority is really a fringe organization. They have a very strict view of morality in America, and they want you all to live within those narrow confines, or they want to see you damned and or dead. It's no coincidence that Senator Jesse Helms has his grubby little hands on some of this legislation, and the gall he has to criticize poetry. This is the same man, and I had this on very good authority, who, before he was a senator, had a radio program in North Carolina, and he was quoted as calling the Reverend Martin Luther King the Reverend Martin Luther Coon. Yes, nice story. What's scary to me is that actually this is not about art. If these people are art critics, I'm a rocket scientist. They want to not only control what art you see, they want to control the movies you see, they want to control the library books you check out, they want to control who uses birth control, what kind of birth control, they want their prayers in your children's schools, they want school book censorship, they want to criminalize abortion, and what they want to do for people who test positive to HIV is really unspeakable. I see this as a chipping away at freedom and liberty and privacy. And when they start tying federal money to free speech and expression, is it that much of a leap of imagination that if my grandmother were to march in a pro-choice march that they'd pull her Social Security check? Or if someone I know who has a student loan would have it pulled because he demonstrated against the government's activities in El Salvador? It's a spectrum, and that's not too big a jump. They may have the power of the select pulpits on their side, but I think it should be heartening to all of us that we have the power of the Bill of Rights on our side. Thank you very much.
Decisions, applications both at the Arts Council level and at the federal level are always reviewed by people who have a reputation for knowledge in the arts, and they make the recommendations, and that goes on up. And the debate is about whether it should be a peer review system like that, or that should be replaced with a checklist approach to granting. And the checklist approach would simply be, yes, I'm an artist, yes, I use pastels, no, I won't do anything offensive, and so on and so forth. But remember this, the peer review system is key to almost all professions. And if the peer review system is under attack in this situation, it's not long before it's under attack in the science, because this is the model for granting in the arts is based on a scientific model, the peer review concept in science. And almost all professions are dealt and controlled under a peer review concept. So that's a very important issue here, and that's why the battle is waged so vehemently to hang on to that concept of peer review.